really intrigued about your journey because you started as a very successful artist and then you had a profound spiritual awakening. What was that awakening and what did it change in your life?
Well, to tell the truth, at the time I didn't know it's called awakening, or I didn't have the language for it. So it will be kind of like looking at it in retrospect, in that sense. So an artist was my identity from as far back as my memory reaches. It's like literally, it's like something suckled, with the milk of my mother. Like as far as I remember myself, I always drew and painted, even before school, even in preschool, anywhere. And at the age of 12, when I had my first mentor, the idea quite clearly crystallized that that's what I want to do in life. Not for a living, that there was no such language, there was no such configuration. It's not that I was choosing a profession, I was choosing way of life. I knew I want to be an artist. Or rather, I knew I'm an artist, I just want to make it happen. So that was my life, and that's all I knew, literally. And one way or another, I found myself, through all this, let's say, way life took in terms of its progression, in London, already by my mid 20s. And my career took off earlier, 2 years before, in Poland, in Warsaw, where I ended up almost on transit straight from the St. Petersburg's Academy of Fine Arts. And here I was in London in the early 90s, at the beginning of the worst recession for the whole world, but for England in particular. Lots of galleries were closing down. The whole art world, the whole art market was suffering. And that coincided with my arrival. So all these rose expectations of me just, taking the art world by storm, because that's how I envisioned that. First, I wanted to go to New York, by the way. But the set of circumstances played kind of differently. And there was this man who invited me to London and professed to be my patron. It didn't pan out to be in the same way how it was all meant to, but one way or another, I found myself that I need to make a living. I need to just, I need to find a way in that whole of the, completely different culture. But somehow in less than 10 years, I've managed to create not just a body of work, but the name for myself. So by mid 30s, I enjoyed what could be called an international art career of a painter with a studio just off Abbey Road on Clifton Hill, at beautiful leafy residential area, really purposefully built in the 19th century building, and I was calling it my studio. I would receive art collectors, art lovers, create my own openings there, like really just ready to take off, and conquer the world, as they say. Little did I know that there was something else in store, by whomever design that was. And I find myself, to make it very simple, in some kind of deep existential crisis. And that existential crisis, which I should immediately add, wasn't the first one. There were a series of these sort of pinpoints in my life, where everything had to be reevaluated, often at the expense of discarding everything I knew, so as to, call it shed the skin, or, wiping the slate. And it was always coincided with, of course, that psychological existential dilemma of what am I here? Who am I? What am I doing? What is my purpose? Yeah, okay, I love art, I love painting, I love drawing, more than anything. But there was always this nagging something nagging there in the background. That's something that I carried with me since my, I would say, late teens. Intense, like a burden, like this existential quest, a cross, whatever you may call it, carrying it. And that led me, one way or another, to attend this TMCD course in my home country, my hometown of Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And I didn't know what to expect. I thought I will just go to that, basically what was promoted and advertised as consciousness enhancing, top of its kind of line of personal development kind of methodology. I will come out of that, like fully put it, to revamp my life, reboot my life. Excuse me. But what happened instead is that I was thrown into this profound energetic process, again, for which I did not have any name at the time, which I have learned almost catching up along the way with the way the process developed. And it developed really in a most powerful, streamlined, unapologetic, merciless, I could even say, manner of wiping out everything I knew about myself in terms of that identity, that sense of certainty, that sense of what am I doing in life, what do I want from life, my relationships, my interactions, and of course, above all else, that existential quest came to its, I would say, crescendo, to its catharsis, and everything crumbled down. Like literally, I watched this kind of like this whole personality, this whole individuality is having its showdown. This. I've realized in some weeks that followed, upon my return to London, that I am amidst this very powerful process known as Kundalini awakening. And in my throat, because it's just I'm recovering from the cold. Today was actually first good day.
No worries. God bless you, man.
Thank you. So when I got back to London and I have realized that life will never be the same. I mean, I knew that when I went to the course, life will not be the same, but it was like a kind of premonition, like a kind of, I sense into something. Here it was like, clearly I look myself in the mirror in the morning and I look at myself and it's like, what is it? Who is this person? Who am I? And the first thing came to me, this is it. You are amidst of something which is much, much larger than you have ever thought, ever conceived. Whatever you may have called it before, spiritual, psychological, transformational, all these were just words with no corresponding reality. It was like a free fall into the abyss, and I did not know where the ground would be, whether I will be smashed against it, whether I'm just in the open space. That lasted for quite some times. So the one thing, of course, I grab hold to is that what I had as that, let's say, spiritual practice. And by then, it all became spontaneous. It became involuntary. So my day would be basically prolonged sittings in the morning, then going about my daily routine of what needs to be done to take care of myself, barely being able to take care of business. Obviously, I could not paint, draw at that time. I would come to my studio. I will in hopes that, okay, today I will be doing something. And I would just wander around, unable to do anything. And it's not like a writer's block. Someone who has done it since his youth. I knew all about ups and downs of creative, let's say, process, what it entails. I knew when to sit out. I knew how to reinforce it. I knew how to go around it. I knew how to circumvent it. It's none of that. It was like something as if something broke, like from approximately somewhere here down. There was this hollowness, no desire, no wish, nothing that would prompt me to express myself. And since I was quite sincere, quite dedicated in the sense of that creative integrity, I didn't want to just do it for the sake of, let's say, robotically applying brush or some, no, it had to have that response in the heart, and it was not there. Instead, I was progressively pulled into these internal states, progressively. So I would not, like, I couldn't wait till I sit down next. I could not wait till I, like, plunge myself back into meditation. And so my life went like that for quite a while. And of course, I don't want to go into the description of spiritual experiences, but there were plenty. Some of them could be spoken of as peak experiences, culminating experiences. In some of my interviews, I've covered this, but there was some, let's say, more groundbreaking experiences where the confidence returned, but the confidence was in the sense that I know that I'm not this person. I know I'm that for which there's no name. I know that what I am is, and what I'm seeing in the mirror is but a husk, a shell, something that is there, something that can be blown by the wind any moment, any time. And that vastness of who I am is then already by then revealed fully. So there was no fear anymore. So even though I could say I was still in that abyss of free fall, there was no longer fear how things gonna pan out. It didn't even come into a question. I knew that whatever might happen, it's not like a religious, let's say, attitude of a fervent or faithful, wayfarer. It's not like I'm placing all my trust into God. None of that. I don't want to confuse the listeners here. It was simply self-evident. It was on the account as that I am that. That power, that what illumines everything, every planet, the sun and the moon and the psyche and the soul, is that same light. And that light revealed itself to itself. Who am I in that? I had no word for it, no name. So from there on, years of painstaking studies begin.
What a fascinating journey. I can relate so much to that feeling of, for a long time, I was also very much in the space. I hated myself, right? And this is a tough statement to say, but it was the truth. I hated the way I looked on the outside, the shell, as you said it, Igor. And I thought that was me. I thought these thoughts, this physical body was me. But then, after years of suffering and asking myself, like, this has to stop. If this doesn't stop, then it's not worth continuing. Um, I stumbled upon a book, The Power of Now. I read that book and I felt the light you talked about. The light, the without any name, without any form, without any description. You cannot describe it. It's such a beautiful thing, the relieving thing to know that it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that power of now, Eckhart Tolle, he certainly launched many a seeker into the, like, first encounter with the reality of the situation. So it's a classic of our time, for sure. And it's beautiful that that book fell into your laps at the time when you probably need it most.
Yeah, it is beautiful. What really interests me about your story, Igor, is you talked about the Kundalini and energies flowing, yet it seems like there was kind of a paradox. Correct me if I'm wrong, where there was a beautiful energy, yet you said there were internal struggles to some extent. Is that correct, or am I confused?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I shared was just like a compressed, compact. juiced version. If I were to now kind of like, let's say, lean back and give it more of a descriptive analogy or exposition. You see, whatever we may speak with reference, I'm talking about myself now, right? With the references, of course, will be through the filter of how I understand this now. So there's no way to step into how it was experienced, even though I kept my journals. I would put some entries, but there is at some point there's nothing I could write because it's simply I had no language for what was going on. So prior to that, maybe I was able to write about a lot of the psychological, that psychic dilemma, like something that is still simply characterized by the fact that there are internalizations of these impulses of creative intelligence, this internalization of these energies. You see that the attention now goes inward for someone who had quite a fair, I would say, balance between what I thought at the time, right? Because being a painter back in the days when I was a painter, I don't know what it would be now. It's impossible to tell. But I belong to that age before the digital age, before the social media. So in order to create something, prolonged phases of time required in a studio alone, right? So it's like already that is granted. In order to produce, create something, one would have to withdraw. And painting, unlike, let's say, any other artistic forms of expression, dance, music, where you are inevitably with other people. For painter, you don't need a company. You are your own company. And then it is interjected or balanced out with this intensity of going out. So I don't want to paint a picture of this hermit painter living in London and enjoying the beauty of the London in the 90s, which was like, the city was happening. I can tell you that. See, it took it from New York. It certainly took it from Paris. London in the 90s was literally where things were happening. And all that coincided with me being an artist. So, of course, I've met a lot of people, amazing, creative, in various different disciplines, from different walks of life and cultures, and the capital of the world in a sense of where, people would flock there from every corner of the planet. So, but I'm not talking about that kind of like balance between being alone and, and going out. All my energies began to be converted inwardly. So there is propensity for silence, to internalize, less socializing. It was kind of progressively setting on, but then went increasingly kind of in the way that just prior to that, what I was describing a moment ago, which culminated in that, what I speak with reference to transformation of consciousness, which I understand now there is no way for it to happen if we are to speak about the anatomy of that spiritual process, the anatomy, let's say, of what is going on, and what we refer to as realignment, is because all these pranic forces, right, this chi, these pranic forces, with 5 principles which conduct all affairs in this house, we call the body, mind, they begin to get converted. And unless they are converted, unless they are internalized, the possibility for awakening of that life force is not there. Yes, there can be forceful awakenings, forceful, let's say, in a manner of increased pressure during the childbirth when a woman undergoes, increased trauma, like, let's say, trauma of losing someone very dear in perhaps unprecedented, unexpected circumstances. right? Increased suffering of one sort or another. This could all prompt to the combustion of that, what we speak of as these pranic forces. But this is not the awakening in a true spiritual sense, you see, and we need to distinguish that. Anytime Kundalini is forcefully awakened, not consciously, forcefully, in other words, Kundalini can be awakened and has been awakened repeatedly, forcefully through conscious means, as yogic, let's say, lore tells us. Yogic path, not yogic in a sense of how it is spoken today in the West, but yogic in a sense of more traditional understanding, that was utilizing that forceful manner of forcing these pranic currents into the gut, where usually there's a conglomerate of all these pathways of energy, more rarely at the heart, so that the main currents, the ascending and descending breath, can equalize. And if this is in the gut, accompanied by the force responsible for metabolic activity, samana prana, else known as samana vayu. It's a fiery quality of prana. So when the ascending and descending pranas meet in the gut, then that causes that fiery element to explode, rushing down to the seat of awareness, as the Kundalini is referred to, in the Muladhara, in the base chakra, where it, as it were, facilitates the profound ignition, where that force, which prior to that was in a state of homeostasis, is, effectively speaking, wakes up from that slumber. And when it's done in a forceful manner, as is done consciously by yogis, hopefully it is accompanied by tremendous knowledge and understanding and guidance. And one would still need to ride these very powerful waves. When it happens, let's say, in any other way, like let's say in my case, it happened due to that of the progressive internalization, where let's say there was a sum total of this realignment where it was psychological above all else, right? It was very possibly linked to the neurophysiological functioning of all the systems of the system, because I was already doing yoga prior to that. I was already quite, and I would say, an accomplished yoga teacher since like years before that, right? I was interested in yoga since mid-90s, since it kind of came to England full blast. But by my mid-30s, when it happened, I still had to go through a lot of that psychological first uncertainty, a lot through neurophysiological, I would say, discomfort. I could say pain, but it's not pain in a sense like I could put my finger where it is aching. No, I was in my plan. I was in my, I would say, yeah, I was like an athlete in every sense of that term. So it's not like my body was not prepared, like it happened to a lot of people. And then there's a tremendous assault on the system, on the endocrine system above all else. But the discomfort I'm speaking about here it's a combination of that psychological discomfort of parting with that sense of who one consider oneself to be, which is never easy, because this realignment pulls the rug beneath our feet. It makes us feel, at least in the ensuing phases, and they could be prolonged ones. You mentioned the power of now. Before Eckhart Tolle sat to write this book, we know that he sat for 2 years on a bench in Oxford. not knowing what he will be doing for the rest of his life. He went through this awakening. His awakening was prompted by deep depression, according to his line of story, right? He was suffering from depression all his life, and there he was as a student in England, German student in England, right? He went through that profound process, and for 2 years he was just like vegetating on a bench, not knowing what he'll be doing, you see? So he may not have emphasized the psychological turmoil. Maybe in his case, it was not a turmoil at all. It maybe have been a place of complete void-like state, free of worry, free of concerns. But I'm working with people now for many, many years, and it's not a homogeneous process. You see, we can spend a week in a state of complete and utter felicity and beatitude, in a state when nothing matters. But then comes a day when we smell the coffee, we look at the bills that arrive, we look at the situation in our relationships, and the whole thing looks different on that day. So we have to summon up the courage, resolve, right? And get on with what needs to be faced here. So it's not an easy affair. Awakening in the Western Hemisphere, awakening in the Western world today, in our globalized world, is not awakening some even 60 to 100 years ago in the ashram, where climate is, compatible with this kind of thing. When the body doesn't need much, a bowl of rice, a bit of dal, right? You're doing your stuff, you're somewhere where you're taken care of, you don't need to worry. This is a far, far fetched reality. Some kind of like, as you can hear, layering adding additional layers here. So it was not at all a smooth process. It was accompanied by demanding phase, and this is what I often speak of, what makes the difference between true Kundalini awakening and the activation of pranic force, which has another Sanskrit name for it, pranotana. When pranotana effectively kicks in, then the display may be very similar to Kundalini, as in most cases it is, but there is no remaking of an individual. In other words, it is not accompanied by that free fall into the abyss. Because during the pranotana, the unplugging, now we're switching to a more clinical language of neuroscience, the unplugging of neurocortexes in the brain, is never nearly as dramatic as in the process of fully blown Kundalini awakening. In pranotana is usually body, in a sense, as all-encompassing, using this in all-encompassing terms, not body as pound of flesh, not body as just this, right? Let's give it a bit of a raise the plank. We use the body, how it is referred to in Eastern culture, right? The body means here subtle body, causal body, right? The body, so made of these layers, progressively subtle layers. So the activation of pranic currents, that pranotana process, usually initiated by deep need for healing from some accumulated stresses, traumas, deep-seating conditionings that prevents one from enjoying life, as simple as that. Whereas Kundalini is another animal altogether, to put it this way. Kundalini process is a remaking of an individual into universal awareness. So this is why some spiritual platforms, some philosophies can be very handy to understand this, so as to separate wheat from the chaff, and so that when we speak about Kundalini, we can speak about it from the platform which operates with a sophisticated knowledge and understanding of what Kundalini actually is. Because in our day and age, everything goes under that, unfortunately. And very often, any kind of pranic activity in the body, any kind of movements, any kind of shakes, any kind of somatic activity is immediately ascribed to Kundalini awakening, which it is not. And we know that. So Kundalini is something which guards our individuality. Even Carl Jung, who wasn't an initiated tantrika, but drew richly from the knowledge of tantras, right, to give us an quite, I would say, an extraordinary for his time, even for our time, perspectives on human psyche. Drew richly from that, from Indian culture in particular. We know that it's a fact. Even though he did not go through the initiation, let alone Kundalini process, in any remotest manner, but in his historical lectures, which he delivered in Zurich in 1933, I believe, he spoke about Kundalini as the power behind individuation. And that was a revolutionary achievement, I would say, in the domain of Western thought, in terms of understanding of what Kundalini process and what Kundalini is. So his seminars on Kundalini are a laudable achievement in the course of psychological thought as that, let's say, transitional phase from religious indoctrination of accepting religious, let's say, creed of how it sees this into the time we find ourselves now. This was tremendously helpful. So that if the Kundalini is the power responsible for individuation, then it is the Kundalini, likewise here, obviously, is that what keeps in check that very, very system of identity, structure of identity. So Kundalini, through the process of awakening, which awakens to itself, according, if we are to use the proper language of the Tantras, it's not awakens in the individual for the individual's sake, as often mistakenly spoken in our day and age. It's an oxymoron in a way. It's not that it's power of individuation that checks my individuality, awakens in me. It's the other way around. It's I'm awakening from the imposition that consciousness throws itself upon itself, where it begins to consider itself to be this soul and soul, this individual limited being. So the Kundalini is a very, very different affair. It's a lifetime affair. It's a complete and utter, it's not an upgrade of the system into the higher operating system, even though if we sometimes maybe, when we lower the plank, when we kind of give it a concessional language, we can speak about that. No, it's discarding the system altogether and realizing that it needs to have completely and utterly different modus operandi. So, and of course, it is accompanied throughout these phases. It's known for. This is what I'm working on right now as we're preparing this major book to publication in the coming year, hopefully in spring, where all this, separating wheat from the chaff is the high time, so there's this clarity at least, and the perspective chosen to give the overview of the Kundalini both as a symbol, cultural, historical, spiritual symbol, and Kundalini as a process, both classical, or from both classical and clinical perspectives. Because there is already enough information in the West and around the world in terms of the clinical accounts of the display of the true Kundalini process.
The There's a thing that fascinated me that you talked about the at the base chakra. There's the energy. You said there's an energy that's in slumber sometimes. So then the question is that the Shakti first, to just to have an idea, or not?
Okay, so it would not be incorrect to say that it is indeed Shakti. But then, hopefully, it is accompanied by understanding that everything is Shakti.
Mm,
So, like, we have to rise to this understanding that the term Shakti means power. But it's not just power per se, it's not power that is an abstract power, it's the power, a concrete power of that for which there is, effectively speaking, another term in the culture, Shiva, not as one of the Hindu trinities. It's a very important adjustment. It's spoken in terms of Godhead as an absolute, transcendental reality, beyond name and form, beyond manifestation, beyond any appearance, beyond cognition, and beyond perception. So it's that monoistic notion of Godhead that exists in many other non-dual or monistic traditions. So we could equate here Shiva with the concept of Allah in the same way, because Allah is a transcendental reality. It's not divinity. It's not a divine manifestation. It's not power. So in language of the Shaivites, Shakti represents the power of pure awareness, the power of Shiva. And everything, the whole manifestation, at all its levels, it's a display of that power. Maybe we can say it also in a different way. It's not just a display, although it is a display. It's the emission of the power of pure awareness. So this display, this emission, this manifestation are inseparable qualities with which Absolute knows itself. So it's a self-reflective power. So Shakti, in addition to the term power, as it is translated, could be also translated in terms of, there's another very beautiful and very, very useful term in Tantrism, Vimarsha. Vimarsha is a reflective power of awareness. And it is because of that power there is the world to begin with. Or, to reinstate that, the world, the manifest reality, is reflective, it's a display of the reflective power of awareness to behold its own magnificence through unlimited points of view, through infinitude points of view. So if we have that understanding, then we can speak about Shakti then in terms of individual experience. So in other words, yes, there is this universal Shakti. We could speak about it as, let's say, ultimately where Shakti can be spoken of in terms of as inseparable from the power of Shiva in the sense of prior to the emission. So this beyond of the beyond, Paramashiva. It's that incomprehensible state of compact mass of consciousness prior to any manifestation, prior to anything. It's not even before Big Bang. We're speaking about something for which there is no term in English language. It's still Shakti because it is in a state of potentiality, pure potentiality. Then there is Shakti in terms of cosmic manifestation. It's all pervasive, it's everywhere. Everywhere. It empowers all our senses, it empowers everything. It empowers the sun, the light of the sun. It implies knowledge and ignorance. So let me just finish to this.
Sure.
And then, of course, there is power as individualized. You see, individualized to the point of this undoubtful, right? This very tactile, this very visceral experience of you and me, right? Where you know that this is your body. I know this is my body. Yes, in the states of expansion, in the states of absorption, I may transcend and discard this body. I'm unraveled across the universe.
Mm.
But I cannot function in that state. So it is interjected with this, let's say, phases of states of consciousness where you and I function on a daily basis. So there must be some power in charge. And so that, from that point of view, we can speak about that power as being, let's say, converged, converted, collapsed, coiled up on itself. And that's how symbolically and traditionally Kundalini is referred to in terms of that aspect of Shakti which is individualized to the point of total and utter collapse into conceiving, thinking of itself, perceiving itself as so and so. And all these three obviously are not separate. See?
Mm.
So these three Shaktis are representing one universal power.
Okay, got you. Because I used to think, I used to watch. There was a time where I felt block inside, and I felt a lot of heaviness in my heart, and I think I was passing through, honestly, Igor, a dark night of the soul. And I put a video of Michael A. Singer, and he was talking about the Shakti and how we're the one who are deciding to close ourselves, and the Shakti can't flow anymore. I guess this is what was my definition before, but now you made it more clear for me that it's actually pervasive, right? That it's actually the power, that it's pure consciousness, that it's so much. It is the unnameable also. So is my definition now clearer than it was before, or what do you think?
Well, it's certainly more helpful to contemplate on this and reflect on this in that all pervasiveness. This is why I thought to bring this concept of the triadic, right, to like three phases. And in fact, in the book, I speak about it I go about it at a great length, and just as in the Kundalini course, sort of as to bring that clarity, because you see, Kundalini enjoys ambivalent perspective in the spiritual world. There are those who swear by it, and there are those who deny its existence. There are those who, let's say, consider it to be simply subordinate and even unnecessary event. So there are many different perspectives out there. So in order to reconcile this, hopefully with the use of that, let's say, time-tested platform that is utilized for this work, which is known popularly as Kashmir Shaivism, which serves as an umbrella for this particular work and perspective. So Kundalini is then given this overview, so it's not spoken exclusively from the point of view of life force in the body, which ignites all processes, which as it were makes the difference between being alive, that is, life force in the body, versus the time has come and the body is discarded through whatever means, through whichever way, long age, accident, whatever, doesn't matter, right? One way or another, life force in the body. But that's only one aspect of the Kundalini. So if we only view Kundalini from that aspect, of course, immediately we limit that, what Kundalini represents there and then. We limit the very power of awareness, which Kundalini represents here, to that individualized perspective.
Okay.
So you see, so this is why one great sage of the 20th century, Ramana Maharshi, when he spoke about Kundalini, when he was repeatedly asked about Kundalini, he made it very clear, like he made that distinction. And one such response, for example, was that the reason people think and speak of Kundalini as residing in the body is because that's a more, let's say, common way of speaking and understanding this, because that's most of our experiences. That's most of our experience. Our experiences with regard to and in relation to this embodied perspective. Whereas he says, or continues, the reality of the situation is the other way around. You see, it's the body is in Kundalini, body is in consciousness, not consciousness in the body. So that perspective, if you see, is flipped. And of course, that's what the authentic Kundalini unfoldment is characterized. There are landmarks, there are these phases when the one who goes through that phase, there are these distinctive, at times, inexplicable experiences of knowing oneself as completely and utterly different from the body, and yet being embedded with every perception. But the perception here is not down to the contact of the senses with sense objects, but one enters that what is called celestial perception. One perceives directly through the templates through which the perception itself functions as the furthest edge, because our senses is literally that, the edge of where the experience takes place. And one can have these experiences where one perceives this in what's in the realm of the senses without the contact of the senses with the objects is being there. So one can smell an extraordinarily refined fragrances which are not in one's surrounding. There's nothing to do with what is physically present, as it were. One can hear divine, melodious, or sonorous sounds, which is not due to the objects striking against each other to produce the sound. To produce the sound, there has to be contact of one object with another, whatever that is, right? The hand plucking the string, right? Hand touching the drum, right? Anything is produced. Even the sound of the wind rustling through the winds is that. But one can be filled with these myriads of sounds and the internal sounds. This is the yoga of sound, nada yoga. That's the department. And so it goes. For every sound at the physical plane of existence, right? There are subtler realms, what I call here templates, that known in Sanskrit as tattvas, categories. And so one taps into that sphere, that realm of where the categories, and from there, of course, one's perception is enriched. So even when going back to the physicality of the experience, one doesn't just experience physicality of what is taking place here and now, but there is this additional quality. You see? There's this additional quality to that experience. It's as if that experience is enriched, ennobled by that, what one knows that what is being experienced here is not just down to the what is happening at the final frontier of the senses being in contact with the objects of perception.
Mm. I just had this thing pop to mind. I have a friend who's a Cambridge professor, and he's an expert in neuroscience. And he told me that our happiness is just a certain modality of the brain being in a certain state. And to some extent, with what I'm hearing from what you're saying, it's deeper than the brain, and it goes on a more deep level where there's something deeper within each one of us that has the power to awaken us, that goes beyond the mind. Is that this is my feeling? Is that kind of what it's like?
Well, there is, of course, this clinical, so-called scientific perspective on what happiness is, right? Often boiled down to, particularly in today's discourse or discourses, to the hormonal activity issued by respective glands in the system. So I gave a pause. So,
Okay.
so on one hand, it is still a valid perspective that
Yeah.
what we call happiness, or let's say what we call certain elated states, is inseparable from the hormonal activity of our body, right? So this is also a very helpful and progressive understanding that happiness, one way or another, doesn't come from outside. It is generated by hormonal activity which is produced by our bodies. In a way, we are this walking lab of all the states that are available to us, right? So this alchemy is always at work. And so the question, of course, rises here, and maybe the research in the direction of, so what would contribute to happiness? And of course, there's a lot of people out there, there are a lot of discussions have been held in that direction ever since that attempt at putting it at the popular level with that animated film, What the Bleep Do We Know? I don't know if you know what I'm referring to. It's an interesting kind of a documentary style, studied with a lot of scientists at of its time. Some of these people who participated in that project became celebrities in our day and age, like people like Joe Dispenza, for example,
Mm-hmm.
who was unknown basically in his day and age when it was viewed. But his whole work is based on that today. His workshops and everything, is based on that understanding that we create these states. These states are already present on the account of how these chemical substances act and interact, how they produce all these hormones, and how all that is down to the activity of what we briefly mentioned earlier in terms of neural connections, neural connections, these peptides, and how this in turn produces certain qualitative hormones that are being issued into the body. So this, of course, can be seen from both perspectives, from the perspective of what makes us dependent upon something. For example, certain drugs, certain substances create that dependence because of that circuit, gut and brain circuit. We literally become dependent on what we put into the system because that prompts that circuit of issuing of certain hormone into the body, which gives that, let's say, gives us that sense of either temporal relief, release, right? That momentarily fleeting moment of happiness, elation, right? All this, right? The whole compote of these hormones that are being spoken of today. Another man who does a lot of coverage of that is Huberman. Forgot his first name.
Dr. Huben.
Yeah, forgot his first name. He talks a lot about that as well, and the importance of that, right? So we know there are like why we all, most of us like chocolate. It's because of the impact that a certain element in the chocolate that has, right? Because it produces the hormone of happiness, literally, right? Or how it's referred to. So, but when you were speaking about this associate of yours, someone you know, in neuroscientist, that the happiness is generated by neural activity, right, in the brain. Hopefully, we gave it a justification, but that is still a clinical perspective. So we can also view this in terms of perhaps all-encompassing view on what happiness here constitutes. Perhaps this would take us back to that understanding that our individuality, our being in the world, our experience of being so and so is an event in consciousness for its own sake, and that sense of separation often is at the cost of tremendous price we pay. And that happiness, or let's say sense on what is that happiness, right? So we can lean maybe on some of the understanding which are perennial in its essence. There are these, let's say, concepts of Sat Chit Ananda, being, consciousness, bliss. So that quality of Ananda considered to be an indispensable part of that Sat and Chit. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Being, consciousness, bliss.
Mm.
In other words, irreducible qualities of our awareness as a substratum of all experiencing. Everything we experience, experienced at the basis, this is what's taking place. So Ananda here as that quality is what perhaps closest to that English term equivalent happiness. Ananda is that sense of that unending sense of that rapturous state, that state of beatitude, state of, let's say, prior to what may take place or may not, when, again, subject-object dynamics is in charge and the senses, let's say, receive their due in the contact with the objects of experience, or pleasant thoughts or something like that we may entertain, right? Like, and at that level. So beyond that, there is this bubbling sense of utter and entire connection to the essence of who we are. In fact, it's not even a connection, it's who we are. So that's why in the perennial language, this Satchitananda is our state, our natural state. So what it represents here is that we are ever like the beingness in us, right? Beingness, being, consciousness, bliss here represents that what the quality of Sat is, that what is eternal being. The quality of Chit is that because there is this being, the being is conscious of itself. So that consciousness. And that in turn brings tremendous thrill, being conscious of being. So Satchitananda is our natural state. Of course, it is colored. It can be layered, obscured, doesn't matter. But that's what illumines every experience. So happiness, therefore, can be then rephrased and understood not as a biochemical product of the brain, even though if we look into what actually biochemical activity of the brain represents here from the holistic perspective, we would have to come to the understanding sooner or later that that's not a clinical mechanical affair. Something utterly by design is divine there. There's something that is in this chemical process, in the process of release of these chemicals themselves. There is something that acts as a constant reminder of that what we are, our primordial connection to the source of who we are. So we can turn this around. It's not that individual that craves happiness for happiness' sake, to revel in a status quo, but rather happiness is a byproduct of individual being in touch with the source of its individuality. So this is where we take that whole idea, notion of individuality further. So in other words, we first have to complete the process of individuation fully, which, by the way, takes us back to the conversation on Kundalini, which is another prophetic insight coming from Carl Jung with regard to what Kundalini's process is capable. Because according to Jung and this line of thought, fertilized the ground of psychological research in terms of what is this individuality. And apparently, we're supposed to grow into this individuality first and foremost. In other words, we have to become truly individual before we can taste universality. So it's like we cannot bypass, leapfrog here. You see, so in other words, the true measure of our individuality, paradoxically, is only known when that individuality is seen through. So you see how this, like, we're entering this paradoxical realm, and that's what the spirituality is really about. It's not about clear black and white, distinguishing something at the level of mental gymnastics. It's living that paradox of being in the body, not being the body, but at the very same time, the body is here, also not separate from consciousness. It's consciousness affair through and through. It belongs to consciousness, and this is the paradigm, perhaps the next frontier, just as we stand in this precipice of, right, of where do we go from here? Artificial intelligence, all these other fears, right, in terms of losing our humanity. Well, perhaps the actual work and job is in truly embracing that what we are. And that is the most bewildering, maybe, and frightening affair of embracing the totality of who we are. Again, taking us back to that psychological realm, according to Jung and all that psychological setup, is that we cannot become whole unless we are able to befriend every aspect, every facet of our individuality, including incorporating that what stands there as that unseen, unconscious, shadowy part, scary part, right? That unpleasant, right?
So what you're basically saying, and it's beautiful the way you put it, is that to get to know the universal, the pure consciousness, the pure love, pure joy, there needs to be an acceptance of the individuality with all its imperfections. So then, you let go of your ego, or and you fall back to your natural state, which is what you said, Satchinanda, being conscious of bliss. I think it's so beautiful the way you put it. It really brought an aha moment in my mind. It made a lot of sense.
Yes, well, that's, you see that there are a lot of conversations about ego in every way. But what is ego, right? Ego is not an entity. Ego is not someone here living and usurping us from, let's say, magnanimity of who we are. It's a movement. It's a movement. And of course, it's a movement in consciousness which is inseparable from the activity of the mind. In terms of the Vedic, yogic, tantric discourse, right, there's a very clear distinction of how this conglomerate comes together into that what is then gives us that sense of what we can speak of as me and mine, right? It's the alliance between that sense of individuality and mind, mental activity, mind. And this is an activity, it's a movement, not an entity. So, therefore, discarding the ego is more accurately put, is incorporating the ego, just as incorporating the shadow, incorporating every aspects and facets of what comprises us and what makes us total, whole, including those parts that we unconsciously reject. And whatever we reject, right, with tremendous force, is present itself with that same very proportionately to the way we reject it in the form of our encounters, relationships, situations in life, because that's the way of consciousness. Until we learn and incorporate that, that experience has to continue. It has to bring itself. So in other words, it's like we'll go round and round and round the corner until we realize that and we incorporate that. Okay, now I'm exempt. Now I'm free to go. Now free flow into the next level.
I've seen that in my life. I can relate to that so much, Igor. Until you incorporate that part that you've been rejecting, like a solid experience is it's gonna sound very childish, but I don't care. I had this crush on a girl that I really liked, and inside of me there was this feeling that I wasn't worthy, so I would seek her attention to feel a glimpse, just a small glimpse of being good enough. And I kept rejecting and rejecting, and a lot of pain came from it because I was rejecting my feelings of unworthiness. I was rejecting them and thinking that by getting attention, I'm going to feel a bit of, of feelings of holiness. And through that journey it took like 6 months, 6 to 8 months, I learned to embrace this shadow.
Mm.
And then that's when I started to feel like I had moved on from this lesson. I moved to the next chapter. So I can relate fully to what you're saying, and it makes total sense because I've been through it very recently. So, yeah, it's powerful.
Yes, this is why they say that the quickest way to God, right, or the quickest way to oneself is through unrequited love. You see, that when this object of love is separated from the one who desires it, it creates tremendous space for consciousness, you see, which bounds to fall back onto itself. So this is Laila and Majnun, right? This is the story of these eternal lovers that represent that, right? That iconically represent that dilemma, right? That Majnun, right? It's
Yeah,
mad, right? He's Majnun,
crazy.
crazy,
Yep.
right? So not many people know that. I often translate that to the Westerners, right? That Laila and Majnun, right? He is Majnun not for no reason. He's given that by Firdausi, right? The great poet, Sufi poet, to who narrated that, right, through the verse, is that he cannot be with Layla. He only sees her, like falls in love when she sees her bathed in a pond, and then he's smitten completely. And of course, he cannot be with an object of his love for whatever reasons that are set against them. And then the physical distance, right, because he needs to go away, right, so as to forget her, but he can't forget her. And so that tension there begins to grow and consumes him. So Laila and Majnun story is the story of this, of that, where the love, when it doesn't find its expression at the level of, let's say, of an object of our love, is that's how we find the revelation of the universal love in the heart. And that is the Sufi lesson here, right? So this is why unrequited love, right? Being rejected in love is some of the most beautiful experiences one can have. Devastating, devastating. I mean, this is powerful knock for confidence, for the ego, right? For the sense of, right, of whatever that is. But at the very same time, it's so much silver lining there. It's literally silver lining of pure gold, I would say.
And I guess something that also is very intriguing for me is to talk about Advaita Tantra. Um, And I guess this is the culmination of this adventure we had, this conversation. What is Advaita Tantra?
Well, Advaita simply means not two, right? It's Dvaita in Sanskrit means two, and when we put the letter A, R, right, it negates that. So in many Sanskrit terms, that's the case. Sanskrit is full of these very emblematic terms, which are negations to reinstate something, right? Like ahimsa, non-violence, for example, right, is a very well-known one of the yogic axioms of living. So Advaita here literally means monistic, non-dual path of Tantra. Because Tantrism can be Dvaitic. In other words, there are Tantras that are dualistic. And so to distinguish that in our work, I use the term Advaita Tantra so as to point that it's non-dual Tantra.
Mm. And the word Tantra, it's clear now for me that the word Advaita means non-dual. The word Tantra, I had an idea that it's about mind, body, and using the mind, body, and energy to awaken. I'm a bit confused, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you and act like I know what I'm saying. I don't understand what the word Tantra means.
All right, well, let's just look at it simply. So the word Tantra, and first maybe we should separate wheat from the chaff. It's very important. Tantra is still enjoys an ambivalent reputation in the West, but not just in the West, in India itself, because of its chief association with sexual practices. But truth be told, only some 12 to 13% of all scope of tantric practices are to do with sex and utilizing sexual energy, let's say. But one way or another, Tantra became known in the West, particularly during the counterculture years and after, soon after, when a lot of workshops, kind of for couples, sexual workshops were created. And so Tantra got that reputation. So if we clear that when we speak of Tantra, it's a time-tested, legitimate, and highly respected among the both scholars and practitioners, methodology-based, approach-based path towards union. The word itself, tantra, it means to expand. It's to expand. You see, tantra. It's to expand something. So therefore, tantra in itself, there can be so many different tantras. Back in the days, I used to say, like many years ago, I used to say there can be Christian tantra, it can be Judaistic tantra. There can be like many different kind of tantras if one wants to. But I got myself into trouble a little bit with that because people immediately begin to associate that with some other connotations. So sticking nowadays more with the traditional way of how the scope of tantric teaching is, let's say, being used today, to these days. But in essence, it's all part of the great tradition born on Indian subcontinent. Some scholars suggest that tantras arrived somewhere circa 4th century of common era, where the revival of the earlier Upanishadic teachings on non-duality, early Upanishadic teachings on unity. So tantras really, in essence, are methodological approaches. They're method-based. In terms of their provenance, they come from Atharva Veda. So there are these four principal branches of Veda: Rig Ved, Samved, Yajurved, and Atharva Ved. So most of tantric practices known today And most of tantric lore comes from Atharva Ved. And there are those that were, let's say, generated within the given culture uh, throughout those centuries, from 4th to 8th, throughout 8th century. This was a tremendous renaissance in Indian subcontinent. But this time has coincided with this really, really great influx, cross-pollination of ideas, and so this is where the flourishment of Tantra took place. And distinguished paths, distinguished schools have been created. Just like with Sufism, distinctive orders were created around that time as well. Right?
Mm.
So this is also very well known, a deep connection between Tantra and Sufism in Indian subcontinent. Because of the, not just because of the cross-pollination, cultural cross-pollination, which has been observed, but because of the methodology and the emphasis in terms of the perennial approaches of how to know oneself, how to know thyself. So that's what Tantra is really. So Tantra is a way of doing something. You see?
Mm. So non-dual, Advaita, Tantra, expansion.
Well, yes, we can say that the Tantra is expansion. It's to expand something, and by virtue of applying some kind of method.
Okay.
So obviously here is in relation to, first and foremost, to expansion of one's awareness, expansion of one's consciousness.
Okay. That's amazing. I'm so glad to have had this conversation with you, Igor. Such a pleasure. Um, I've learned things that I thought I knew, and that I now got to know fundamentally. And I guess, I don't guess, I know based on the conversation today, you have a power to explain deep philosophical concepts in a very logical way. That's also very spiritual, and I guess that's such a beautiful thing. Um, so Igor, first of all, thank you so much, and second of all, I want to leave you the space to um share with us anything that you're excited about that you're working on. You said you're working on a book. Is there anything else?
Well, yes, in terms of the, let's say, these projects that we are working on, because the book is based on online course that we have offered since 2020. But since then, it's been transcribed and modified, expanded tremendously, and I would say nothing short of rewritten. So this is going to be a solid volume on Kundalini, and we're aiming to release it in the spring of 2025. So that's one of the projects. We have online, of course, events. So listeners, whoever is interested to check out our offerings, they will be welcomed to see a events page on our website. And of course, live events is the real deal. This is where the real thing happen. So we offer live events in Europe and in North America, currently in Mexico, where we go back every year. So our next program going to be at the end of at the end of January in Buena Vibra. It's a beautiful place, and Totpetslan, very legendary, a lot of mythology associated, like ancient Mayan mythology in that place. So we're going to go there. Then there are events throughout Europe. We go to Vienna with long weekend programs. We have events in Poland now into the second year. And of course, we keep going back to Germany, to the place of stillness, Gulsandstorf, in northern Germany, year after year for many years now. So, yeah, so this is really, I don't know what to add there. But I think everything, all the info is available on the respective website. And we have published our first book last year called Chamatkara, The Hidden Path, which is a slim book, and it's mostly a tribute to my life as an artist and the passion, the love for beauty, and that transition towards, let's say, working now in this capacity of a guide, spiritual guide. So that was chosen to be as the first offering as a book. So if someone would like to check it out, it's also there on the website. We have a dedicated website. Our own publishing house called Song, S-O-N-G, Song Publishing.
Igor, it's such a pleasure. I'm gonna include all the links below, so people can have direct access to you. And as a recap of this episode, I can recap it in 3 words. It's actually one word. I'm just gonna say it in separated in three. Satchinanda. I think that's a good ending, bro.
Good, Denzi. Thank you. It was great pleasure to speak to you and to converse. So thank you. And also thank you for doing this great job, for
Thank you. Thank
offering your platform for these kind of conversations in the realm of consciousness for all of us to grow and learn from each other. It's beautiful.
thank you, my friend. Such a pleasure.